Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today it is time for another edition of Female First, which means we are once again so happy to be joined by the amazing, the wonderful, and tired today, Yves.
Yes.
Welcome, Yves.
Wait, what? You got to call people
Thank
out
you.
like that.
No, I was going to
tired
say,
too.
I appreciate the transparency. I'm sure a lot of other people can relate.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. And I know we've talked about this before. Are you a napper? What do you do when you're tired?
am I a napper?
Yeah.
Of course I'm a napper. I'm literally going to take a nap after this. I'm going to take a nap. I'm probably going to clean and then go to the gym. But like today is a most definite, I need a nap day.
Uh-huh.
I try to be disciplined with my naps. Like, they say 20 to 30 minutes, but I sleep how my body tells me to sleep. So if I have the capacity for it, if I have the time for it, and I know I do, like there's nothing I need to rush and get out the door for afterwards, I'll take it. I'll take it easy. Take it as it comes.
That's good. I mean, that's a great way to be like in touch with your body. That I think a lot of us, I know I am not. So I think that's a very healthy outlook.
Thank you.
Yes. How have you been other than that?
I've been good, honestly. I know a lot of people are melting in this heat that we're having here. But I love it. I've been outside quite a bit. I've been burning in the sun, actually physically getting a tan because I'm burning in the sun. Ooh. But not that burning notwithstanding, I'm still having a good time in the sunlight. So I think I've been pretty good. For the most part, been to the beach recently. I've been
nice.
And a lot more than I normally am. I'm really connecting with water in this moment, and that feels good. So I'm cooling off a little bit.
Yeah, that's funny because I have avoided the heat so hard, but it is very, very, very hot.
Yeah,
and I'm also. I too went to the beach recently, but I hardly ever get in the water. I just kind of look at it. But I do love looking at it and hearing the sound of it.
Oh, did you guys not do like giant float times?
What's a float time?
Oh my gosh. So I have a friend who's been on the show, and she's a nurse. So I'm sure she'll listen to this episode. She's one of my good friends that listens. I don't shame anyone who doesn't, but she does.
You should.
No. But she just is somebody who likes to like do things up, I guess. And part of that is she also likes to find good deals. And that means over the years, we've accumulated a lot of really egregious floats, big floats. And we tie them together and we make a float island. And we make all the kids jealous with our cool floats.
Yeah.
But over the years, we've kind of got more and more tired, I would say. Not as much gumption. So I have a float, and it's under some boxes. And that was enough to stop me, Yves. That was enough. I was like, no floats this year.
Yeah.
So we
a
did
little bit
not.
more effort.
That's fair.
Yeah. But we had a great time anyway.
That's good.
Also,
I never do well with floats.
I like it. We've got a cat cameo.
Yeah, that's the first time. I didn't know you had a cat. I just got shocked by that. I was like, wait, what is that?
I didn't want to distract. She loves sitting on me while I'm here. Yeah, I'm just taking care of her. I've had her for a little over a month now. Her name is Gigi.
Okay, I was like, wait, when did you have a cat?
She's not mine.
Really? Maybe she should.
She owns me,
She
honestly.
loves you. Look at that. Listeners, she's just staring up at Yves like, hey,
It's very cute.
I should live here forever. That's the face.
Yes. Yes. Well, welcome to our recording session. Yes. But who did you bring for us today, Yves?
Today we're talking about Mary Eliza Mahoney. So speaking of nurses, she was the first Black American professional nurse. Definitely not the first Black nurse in the U.S. though. So yeah, just want to point that out, that there are a lot of people who were doing that kind of work before this whole institutionalized, what we would consider professional or trained thing happened. That knowledge was being passed down in other ways, and Black people were barred for some of those institutions. And also, these were early days of nursing in general. So doesn't change the fact that Mary Eliza Mahoney was a pioneer in the field, and she was really instrumental in the beginnings of Black people being involved in nursing in institutional ways and in ways where they were receiving formal training. So yeah, and we've also, I would just like to call out too that in a previous episode of Female First, we talked about Rebecca Lee Crumpler, who was also, she was the first Black female physician in the U.S. So if you're interested in medical history of first in the United States, then you can go back and listen to that episode too.
Yes. But okay, should we get into some history?
Yeah. So Mary Eliza Mahoney was born in 1845 in Massachusetts. Her exact birthday is unknown. We often see this happen in these female first stories. Some sources say that it's May 7th, 1845, but generally personal details about her life and her family history aren't super well recorded, although she did have descendants that came from some of her siblings who were able to pass down some knowledge as well. And there are also people who have written about her knowledge through what we do know that was recorded and orally passed down. But either way, her parents were thought to have been enslaved before they were emancipated, and they may have previously lived in North Carolina, but then moved to Boston. And she had 3 younger siblings, though one of them died as a child. So she went to Phillips School in Boston, and she started first grade when she was 10 years old. This was one of the first integrated public schools in Boston, and she went there up until the 4th grade. It is not completely clear how she got interested in nursing. Like I said, a part of where there are a lot of gaps in the history that we know about her do come in her earlier life, in her childhood, and also in her family history. But when she was a teenager, she began working at the New England Hospital for Women and Children. And this is where her nursing story starts, really. So regardless of how she received her psychological or personal interest in nursing itself, she was already around nursing a lot. The hospital was founded in 1862, and it was the first one in Boston that was run by women physicians and surgeons. So it is what it sounds like, a by women for women situation. And pretty self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. And all the physicians who were full-time staff here were women, and there were women and children patients. And at the time, women were barred from being on hospital staff and going to medical schools and participating in professional societies. But this establishment allowed women to get training in line with the kind that was available to men. So in 1863, it follows that it became the first institution in the United States to offer formal and professional nursing training. The first, this is another first, not Mary Eliza Mahoney's first, but another first that happened at the New England Hospital. The first institutionally trained nurse in the U.S. graduated from there in 1873, and that was Linda Richards. That is also part of the story leading up to Mary Eliza Mahoney's first. Now the hospital is called the Nima Community Health Center. But anyway, there is a long history of Black women acting as medical caregivers for their family members, for community members, for their enslavers, and for their employers in so many different ways. And oftentimes that medical caregiving role was woven into other roles of domestic work and domestic servitude. So those roles kind of combined in ways. And when Mahoney was coming up, yes, I think a lot of people will associate Boston with being an abolitionist hotspot. But of course, there was still segregation and racism. And according to the biography, Mary Eliza Mahoney and the Legacy of African American Nurses, only around 2,000 of the nearly 115,000 people in Boston when Mahoney was born were Black. So Black women did work as nurses in private homes, but that role was integrated into their other duties as domestic workers. Mahoney herself was involved in that history, so she started working as a nurse in people's homes around 1865. But before the Civil War, there wasn't institutional medical training for Black women. Of course, we know a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with the history of nursing and how that was wrapped up in the Civil War and Florence Nightingale, and how clear the Civil War made it that there was a need for nurses and having a higher standard of medical training. So during Mahoney's time working at the New England Hospital for Women and Children, she cleaned, she cooked, she did laundry, and she sometimes helped the nurses do their work, but she wasn't really involved in the nursing side yet. Over years past, Mary Eliza Mahoney continued to do those other kinds of work at the hospital. And during that time, the hospital's school program advanced a lot from the point when it first opened. So at first, students only got like 6 months of training. Not many women applied and not many people graduated from the program in its first couple of years. But by the time Mahoney enrolled, the program was about a year long, and students were studying nursing in the medical, surgical, and maternity wards, and they were studying night nursing. And the students who graduated got certificates. So the hospital's charter only allowed one Black student and one Jewish student to be accepted each year. Also, people training as nurses there were reportedly treated kind of as lesser than the people who were training to become doctors there. And the doctors in training got more attention and higher priority. There is mention of the people who were coming in to train as nurses being called pupils versus the people who were coming in to be trained as doctors being called students instead. So there is some sense of superiority or hierarchy in the way that nurses were treated and how they were viewed at the hospital versus the people who were training to become doctors. But Mahoney applied to the hospital's nursing program. And at this time, she was around 33 years old. And that made her older than the average applicant because the school did give a cap of, I think it was 31 years old. But it's thought that because she was already familiar with the people who were working at the hospital, that she was still, and she was qualified, of course. She had the experience to be able to get into the school, that she was eligible and she got in. So this was 1878 at this point. Mahoney was admitted to a 16-month nurse training program at the hospital. And that made her the program's first Black nursing student. So as no other Black woman had been admitted to the program before, it was also speculated that a woman who was high up at the hospital named Edna Dow Cheney was the one who was able to help influence the people who were admitting the students to accept her. So once she got into the program, it was pretty rigorous. They worked from 5:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. daily. They were paid $1 to $4 per week, quote, after the first fortnight, according to the actual value of their service to the hospital, which sounds very vague. And like there's a lot of potential for problems there. Not to mention all the other issues of racism and discrimination that can create these kind of arbitrary standards of things being applied from one person to the next. But hey, I wasn't there. I don't know much else about how that rule was actually applied to people, but it wasn't a lot of money. $4 then, it's about $122 today. And that was the top value that they gave. I can't say how those numbers were distributed among people and how often they gave one amount over the other. But each nurse was in charge of a ward, which had 6 beds in it. And apparently, Mahoney never missed a day of her program. And even Mahoney's sister later applied and was accepted to the program. But there was a question that was raised here in looking back at the history of the students who attended during Mahoney herself and during the other students who were there during Mahoney's time of, were nursing students getting an education or were they just cheap labor? And a lot of value judgments around that. But it is a sort of question that has come up in that history because they were being paid these low amounts, and other people who had more training weren't the ones who were providing the nursing at the hospital, because these students who were being paid very low amounts were the ones who were providing the nurses. So it's kind of stripping away their ability to be able to work with already professionally trained nurses. But yeah, so And on August 1st, 1879, Mahoney graduated. And this made her the first Black person in the United States to become a professional nurse. And the New England Hospital continued to accept qualified Black students, but plenty of other nursing schools barred Black students from enrolling. Most of the people who graduated worked for families. And in that book that I mentioned earlier, that biography, Mary Eliza Mahoney and the Legacy of African American Nurses, the author says, quote, "The larger hospitals did not seem to have a need for nurses when they used student nurses to do most of the labor in return for minimum wages." So after graduating, Mahoney went back to working as a nurse in private homes now with this new training that she had. Most of the people, as was the case for so many different people that she worked for, were wealthy white folks. She cared for pregnant women, mothers, and newborns. And a lot of her work was in New Jersey, but she did travel elsewhere on the East Coast as part of her work when she had patients who she needed to travel for. At first, she charged about $1.50 a day as a private nurse, which is about $45 today. But by 1892, she had raised her rate to $2.50 per day. She registered with a nursing directory that the Massachusetts Medical Library kept, and she was the first Black person to do so. So we don't have a huge history of how it worked in her day to day over those decades that she was working as a private nurse. We don't have a ton of knowledge about what the people who she was working for had to say about her, but there are a few comments that people said. We know that people did refer to her as an excellent nurse, because this directory allowed nurses to offer their services to private employers, and it also kept her references for potential employers. And there were people who commented on her abilities and her skills and proficiency as a nurse in their homes. And also she was kind of like, she was known around town. So there was a little bit of, oh yeah, we've heard she's a good nurse going on. So that is what we do know about her skill as a nurse in private settings. She lived along in Roxbury, and she was religious, and she attended church for a little bit of her personal life. It's also like, in terms of her physicality, she's described as being very petite, around 5 feet, and pretty small. But yeah, so that's what we know about her nursing career and a little bit about her personal life. And getting into her later life, she also was a person who, of course, she was a pioneer in her own way and recognized that and used her status and her knowledge to be able to give back to others. And she did that in one way through the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses. That formed in 1908. And that organization was formed as a response to the employment discrimination that these nurses faced, that the discrepancies that they faced, the lower quality of training, lower standards of training, and of course, the racism that Black nurses faced at the time. And Mahoney was part of the early years of this association. Not long after it formed, she got lifetime membership status with it, and she was elected to be its chaplain. She also, in her later years, ran the Howard Colored Orphan Asylum in Brooklyn. And she was one of the first women who was registered to vote in Boston. And she ended up retiring in Massachusetts. So she found out that she had breast cancer in 1923, and she continued to struggle with her health because of the cancer, and she ended up dying on January 4th in 1926. Mary Eliza Mahoney is buried in Woodline Cemetery in Everett, Massachusetts. And there is a monument that was dedicated to Mahoney at her gravesite. So her gravesite was kind of overgrown at a point. It was covered up, and then a fundraising effort was led by a nurse named Helen Sullivan Miller, who had been researching Mahoney and wanted to honor her through uplifting her gravesite. So she decided to have a headstone installed to recognize her as the first professional Black nurse in the United States. So Mahoney continued to be honored in other ways as well. In 1936, the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses instituted the Mary Eliza Mahoney Award. The first recipient of that award was Ada Bell Samuels Toms, who herself has her own history in pioneering in the nursing field. And later, the American Nurses Association adopted that award when the organizations merged. So even though there isn't a lot of Mahoney's recorded history, there are people who have written down her legacy, her biography, and honored her through awards and through making sure that her gravesite was taken care of and marked with her name so that people who came by could know the legacy and that she was buried there and could visit. And that is the story of Mary Eliza Mahoney, early pioneer in the nursing field in the United States.
It's interesting to me that you brought this, which was always, as always, so fascinating and so nuanced. And there is just so much history and still ongoing battles for, like, in the medical industry and for nurses. I speak as my friend Marissa, you know, we've talked about it. But Samantha and I and a bunch of listeners have been talking about medicine and health a lot lately. And there's been a lot of books published about it. And, like, the power having a good nurse versus having a bad one is such a huge thing.
Yes. I don't even know where to begin with that.
Yes. So I love that, you know, we don't have so much history. And as always, thank you for bringing this, and thanks to all the people who have put in the work. But from what we do know, she was a good nurse.
Yes.
People appreciated what she did, and it seems like she did a really good job, was very competent, and because of that was very well respected and liked as a nurse, at least. And that's, it's such a big thing to find a good nurse.
100%.
And also, I love the cat, listeners. The cat has been amazing.
An extra layer of entertainment. I just see a paw pop up on the screen out of nowhere.
So that everybody knows, I'm very gestural when I'm speaking. So I move my hands everywhere. And she clearly was not happy about that.
She was helping.
She was, like,
she was all about it.
No.
I was like, yeah, me too. Let me help here. I got this.
Yes. So if towards the end you heard some giggles, some smothered giggles, that's what it was.
It was very cute.
It was very cute. Well, thank you as always, Yves, for joining us. We love having you. The cat is welcome anytime.
I'll let her know.
Okay, cool.
I'll translate.
Probably have a fee next time, a talent fee.
You're right.
Where can the good listeners find you?
You can find me at yvesjeffcoat.com. That's spelled YVESJEFFCOAT for those of you who don't know how to spell my name. You can find me through all the different pathways on that website. But if you want to go directly to Instagram, you can find me at Not Apologizing. And that's where I'm the most active. So I'll leave it at that.
Fair point. Yes. And I hope you have a good nap, Yves.
Thank you.
Yes.
I really appreciate that.
Of
You
course.
deserve it.
You do. Well, listeners, if you'd like to contact us, you can. Our email is stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at Mom Stuff Podcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I've Never Told You. We also have a TeePublic store and a book. You can pre-order it at stuffyoushouldreadbooks.com, both physical form and in audiobook form. Thank you again, Yves. Thanks to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.